All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Houston. I'm the Executive Director of the Wolf River Conservancy, and I want to thank you for joining us here today at Flyway Brewing. It is a great day to talk about the aquifer. This is something that we've been doing together with Protect Our Aquifer for 3 or 4 years now, so it's become a bit of a tradition. Today's event is part of our educational outreach to the community. The Wolf River Conservancy was founded in 1985. This is our 40th year serving the Mid-South, and our mission is to preserve and protect land in the Wolf River watershed and preserving the Wolf River as a sustainable natural resource for our community. And if you've ever been involved with the Wolf River Conservancy or are familiar with our work, you know that it lines up really, really well with the mission and the work of Protect Our Aquifer. So, if you're not familiar with the Wolf River Conservancy, I'd encourage you to join us at one of our many events. We've got the final event in our Wolf River Restoration Series coming up later in April. And we've got a bunch of events out on the Wolf River Greenway, of which we are the lead design, engineering, and construction partner for that project. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today and kick off our 2025 version of the State of the Aquifer. Protect Our Aquifer was formed in 2016 to address deep well intrusions into the Memphis Sand Aquifer, and is led today by a fierce advocate for our aquifer, Miss Sara Houston.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric, and thanks for everybody for coming out. Huge kudos to the Wolf River Conservancy for hosting us yet again. You know, we're all about clean water, whether it's in the river, underground, so we love to have this partnership together. I'm gonna get my clicker over here. So I think we're all here today because Memphis has the best water in the world, right? Yes. And I see, yeah, raise your glass, I love it. It makes good beer, it makes good drinking water, and it really is an incredibly unique resource. And this is a bona fide fact. I mean, you have reports from the EPA, we regularly are shown to have the highest quality water, and that's really because of our geology. We got really lucky, just happened to land right above this amazing resource, the Memphis Sand Aquifer. So we are actually the largest city in the United States that relies 100% on groundwater. That's very, very unique. There's small rural counties that might rely on the aquifer, but we are the largest metropolitan area. This resource was discovered back in 1887, and when they punctured the clay layer just a few miles from here, it was under so much pressure that clear water came from underground 387 feet and rose to the surface. This was a time where we had just recovered from the yellow fever epidemic. Can y'all hear me back there? Yeah? Okay, cool. I'm trying to project and use the mic. Okay. We had just recovered from the yellow fever epidemic. We didn't have a city charter. You know, we were drinking out of the Wolf River at the time. And we didn't really know what we were doing as a community, but discovering the aquifer set forth a whole new trajectory for our city. And it's one that is going to actually help shape our future as well. So at Protect Our Aquifer, our mission here is to protect, conserve, and preserve the Memphis Sand Aquifer. It is extremely amazing. Like Eric said, I'm the executive director, but we have an awesome team of multiple staff members. We got volunteers. We have water warriors that have gone through training programs to be better advocates in their community. And it's really about everybody being informed, being knowledgeable, and knowing how they can play a role in this. Because it isn't just my water, your water, it's everybody's water. So this is called the State of the Aquifer. I'm really focusing on Shelby County though. Y'all might know that the aquifer is multiple states wide. It is a huge resource. But to get into some of the nitty-gritties on what's going on, what we're working on, really honing in on Memphis and Shelby County. We definitely want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions, and you also are welcome to ask questions throughout. If you're kind of unclear, I'm going to get into some real deep nerd stuff, so feel free to be like, clarify. So right here is this amazing layer cake we have below our feet. We talk about artesian wells. We talk about 2,000-year-old water. And it's because of what we have here. This little tiny Mississippi River, the world's 4th largest river, looks pretty small compared to our massive Memphis Sand Aquifer. But you notice that there's a shallow aquifer below Memphis, then there's a nice thick clay layer. That's been our saving grace. That's been almost this impenetrable force between what we've done on the landscape and our deep Memphis Sand Aquifer. Then you've got more clay, the Fort Pillow Aquifer, which Millington uses. There's a few other wells out in East Memphis that do use water from the Fort Pillow. You see it's much smaller though. We can't move all of our operations to the Fort Pillow if we were to taint the Memphis Aquifer. Then you got more clay, and then you got the McNary Aquifer, 3,000 feet below the surface. There's one more aquifer, but it's pretty salty, pretty briny down there, so we don't really use it. Now, when we talk about 2,000-year-old water, where did that come from? We're talking about this recharge zone. I'm not getting too much into that today, but you can definitely follow us for more discussion around the recharge zone. It's right outside of Shelby County. But we have this amazing natural Brita filter where 2,000 years ago, rain that fell in Fayette County. See, there's no clay over there. It's been filtering through this deep sand layer, this very slow infiltration to reach our wells, and that is what is coming out of our taps today. It's been traveling towards us for a very, very long time. Now, what are we protecting it from if we've got all this good water, right? Well, we've learned over the years that there's actually legacy pollution, contamination, that's slowly sinking down, and it's coming in through that clay layer. This clay layer we once thought was thick and perfect and nothing could get through it. Well, it turns out there are natural gaps in that clay layer. We call those breaches. Who's heard of breaches before? Breaches? Okay, the education's working. I love to see it. So breaches, these were natural. These happened millions of years ago when rivers were running their way through the landscape. They would erode that clay away, and then over the years, sand and silt filled those in, built the shallow aquifer we know today. So they've been here for a long time. So then what's the problem? Why are they now an issue? Well, that is because our water levels have dropped. I talked about that artesian effect. Our water used to flow to the surface. Well, we have pumped so much water in Shelby County that we have actually created these big cones of depression. Doesn't sound good, does it? We don't like depression. We're out of winter. We're back in spring now. We're done with depression. Unfortunately, our aquifer is not. So we have these big, deep things. Think about when you are drinking a milkshake, sucking out of that straw and the sides cave in, right? That's what happens around our wells. And so we are pumping at a rate at which we are no longer able to sustain that 2,000-year-old water. So that means water's coming in from the shallow aquifer. Now this image was taken from a study that was done during the Mississippi v. Tennessee Supreme Court case. Our neighbors sued us because they thought we were pumping too much. We're like, well, the Supreme Court says, yeah, we kind of are, but it's a shared resource. So if you want to get serious, you have to create a compact together. Mississippi just wanted $600 million. They didn't want a compact, so that's for a future date. But you can see that this issue really is pulling in water from our neighbors because we use so much here. And we have learned over the past 7 years a lot more about our aquifer than we have ever known before. Who here has an MLGW water bill? So 1% of your water bill is going towards an aquifer study. It's going to the University of Memphis Caesar, where they're trying to learn more about our aquifer. They're trying to learn, where are these breaches? Where is there water quality issues? And it's all buried in student theses and dissertations and super technical report. And so at Protect Our Aquifer, we do a lot of technical layman's term translation. It's like, okay, dissertation alone is a hard word, and then there's like 400 pages of really good stuff in there. So we pull all that stuff out. So at the end of the first 5 years of your water bills paying for this study, we have learned that the majority of well fields, the majority of MLGW-owned wells that go into our ground, pump that water up, clean it up just a little bit, send it to our homes and businesses, actually does not have 2,000-year-old water in it. There's only one well field left in Shelby County that we know has the good 2,000-year-old water. You know, when you're driving towards Crosstown on North Parkway, you see Mallory Pumping Station. That's the only one that we know of today that still has 2,000-year-old water. And so they measured some other well fields. This light blue means young water, modern water. So this is water that fell as rain on the surface 60 years ago or less. So that means it's hit our ground, saturated through the soils, in the shallow aquifer, through the clay layer breaches, and is being pulled down at such a rate that it's actually making its way into the deep Memphis Sand Aquifer. And you can see here where we have some trouble spots. Davis Wellfield down in South Memphis, almost half of that wellfield's water is young water. You go farther out to the east where the recharge zone is, Lichterman, Shaw, McCord, and Bartlett, a lot of young water. Young water doesn't necessarily mean polluted, but we know what is coming behind it. We have not treated this landscape well over the past 2 centuries. And that's a lot of what Wolf River's work has been doing over this past 30 years, is trying to undo a lot of really poor water management at the surface level. There's kind of been this disconnect. What we do to the surface doesn't matter. We got the good drinking water below. Well, we're coming at a time and a point in history where that connection is real. And that connection can actually impact us, our health, and our treatment costs for industries and for growth. So we're at a point in time where we need to recognize, do we want to keep the good 2,000-year-old water? Do we want to change our strategies and how we use this aquifer to keep the 2,000-year-old water? Or are we okay with this mixing, letting the 1-year-old bourbon mix with the good 40-year-old stuff? I think we want to keep the nice stuff, right? I mean, Memphis deserves good things, right? So that's where we are right now. We are in this moment in time where we need to reconcile with what has happened in our past and how do we move to the future? And when we do that, we really have to look at, again, like I said, the past, and we have to understand where these potential threats to our health may be. So what you're looking at here is a map with a couple different things. You've got those breaches, what we know of the breaches in yellow and red, and that's the best we know about those clay layer gaps. So that's where that surface water can most directly enter the Memphis Sand Aquifer. Then these teal polygons, those are all the well fields, all the clusters of wells we have in the county. So that some of them owned by MLGW. Who else owns and operates their own water system in Shelby County? What? Germantown. Who else? Bartlett. Collierville. One more? Not Arlington. Millington. There we go. I think I had it over there. Right. So there's 5 municipalities that are all working off this system together. And so the last thing you see here is this recharge zone. That is that red area. That's where that clay pinches out. So there is no clay layer. That's just going to be sand, maybe a little bit of shallow soil, but you have a much more direct impact to the landscape and our aquifer right there. So at Protect Our Aquifer, when we're thinking about, there's a lot to do here, right? We are a staff of 4. They're sweet, amazing, smart people. There's a lot to do, right? So how do we hone in? What are we really trying to get done? So we try to look at, I'm jumping ahead. We try to look at 3 things. Is there a known contaminant nearby? Is there a breach where that contaminant could travel through? And is there a drinking water well, a place where it could actually impact our water and our health? And the first one I point out here, you see this, this big X sign. That is actually one of Collierville's well fields. They had to shut down an entire drinking water well field and drinking water treatment plant due to contamination. There are 3 Superfund sites lined up down Byhalia and Poplar right there where it has impacted the aquifer so bad it is no longer safe to drink the water out of that well field. And say that? Superfund site. No, the good question. So yes, what kind of site was it? Superfund site. So a Superfund site is a federally designated contaminated site that is so bad and so important they decided to put it on a federal list to get cleaned up. And the Superfund site was put in place, the Superfund program was put in place in the 80s by President Reagan. So Republicans do good things for our environment. And they created this fund to help finance cleanup projects. Because this was a lot of times where companies go bankrupt, they leave, and it's left to local communities to finance and clean it up. So Shelby County alone has 11 Superfund sites. That is by far the most Superfund sites in the whole state of Tennessee. We have a lot here. And so that is a very real example of a cost to the community and a threat to our health when we do not manage the land correctly and we do not manage our water system. And so what could happen in the rest, we've got the clay layer in the rest of the county, so we've bought us some time, but we need to use that time wisely. And so we look at, this is the former Custom Cleaners Superfund site by University of Memphis, Sheehan Wellfield. That got $3 million from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Act. They've been cleaning that up, but they're starting to get little hits of a neurotoxin in the wells. It's way below the EPA limit, but that means there's a lot more coming. So that's a priority area for us. You have the Memphis Defense Depot, a long time legacy site from World War II. They buried all kinds of nasty stuff there. It's right by MLGW's Allen Wellfield. It's shut down 3 wells due to contamination, and they're just pulling it more deeper into the well field. That's an area we focus on. And then I'll get more into Davis Wellfield in South Memphis. You've heard a lot about Boxtown, XAI, Byhalia Pipeline, TVA. This area has not only breaches, a fault line, and a lot of legacy pollution that threatens that aquifer, the aquifer there. And you notice, that 50% of their water is young water, meaning it's pulling stuff down that we need to intervene. And so we have unseen contamination heading towards our aquifer. And we know the general theory of it. We don't have a lot of information on the particulars. And that's what a lot of science is going into now. But we need to think about management. And we need to think about understanding where this is and dealing with it before it's too late. So we need interventions. This is what Protect Our Aquifer is about. Solutions, advocacy for change. If we continue business as usual, we're going to see the wide-scale problems that Collierville has in the next 10, 20, 30 years and beyond. And we're just going to get more and more big, heavy water users as we have more industry coming and onshoring. So we need to get smart. And we believe Memphis is smart, and we can do this together. And so I'm going to give you all a little example of one of the solutions that we've been pushing for. Anybody remember the origin story of Protect Our Aquifer, 2016-17 TVA wells? Anybody? Two people, come on, more than that. All right, thank you. So, back in 2015, 14, 15, 16, TVA was getting ready to shut down their old coal plant where they had buried coal ash in an unlined pit for decades. And they're going to build their new gas plant, much cleaner for the air, still fossil fuel, but cleaner than burning coal. But they needed a lot more water, and they needed clean water, high quality water. They couldn't use the Mississippi River the way they used to use for the coal plant. So they were like, we could use recycled wastewater. And the environmental community was like, excellent idea, TVA, do that. Well, they decided that was going to be too expensive, so last minute, they went and drilled 5 deep wells into the aquifer. And our partners at Sierra Club caught that and said, whoa, that sounds like a bad idea. If you pump 5 million gallons a day, aren't you going to pull some of this arsenic and lead and fluoride and mercury down? And they tried to sue them, got kicked out of court because they didn't have local standing. So Protect Our Aquifer was formed. Ward Archer was approached and said, hey, we know you're into the aquifer these days. Would you be willing to, create a 501c3 real quick and just fight this and then protect the aquifer and be done? Sure, 9 months, I got that time. Well, turns out that alone took 2 years. And then we realized the scale of the problem I've just explained to y'all. Unfortunately, this one issue is not going to be check, done, aquifer's done. So luckily, we won this. And they cannot use those wells on site unless it is for an emergency only. And they are still using the aquifer, but they're buying it from MLGW down the road a little bit, from that Davis well field I showed y'all. So that was kind of our first little entrance into understanding hydrogeology and understanding all this contamination and all of this stuff. And you can see the proximity. There's the coal ash, there's the coal plant, there's TVA gas. That's our city's wastewater plant. So you can see, I mean, proximity-wise, pretty good spot. And then they treat about 70 million gallons of our wastewater a day, both from us residents and industries. Treat it just enough to be good enough to put into the Mississippi River, so standards pretty low, to be honest. And they put it out through that little flume, and that's that. Well, then enter the chat, XAI supercomputer. Oh my goodness. Who saw Elon Musk 2024 coming? No, me neither. So you can see, like, proximity-wise, very, very close. And this is this idea of this potential recycled water facility. So to give y'all a quickie on this, this is kind of our diagram of what's happening now. I figured there would be a lot of questions, so I'm going to go over it quickly, come back around. But you know, this is a campaign we've had since we started for TVA specifically, where you need to build a little extra plant to clean up that wastewater more. Because what we put into the Mississippi River can't be used for TVA's cooling. It'll scale up and gunk up their equipment too fast. But because our wastewater effluent, what we send to the Mississippi, is so nasty, it needs a lot of extra treatment. TVA's never been willing to put up the capital to do it. After the December 2022 rolling blackouts and our whole Christmas was ruined with boil water notice and rolling blackouts, this was the concern we had all along. You literally had TVA competing with the residents of Boxtown for water during a crisis. This was what we were so concerned about. We don't need industrial cooling on our drinking water system. And so we led a whole campaign in 2023, just trying to convince the MLGW board to lose their largest customer. We're like, hey, we know you sell a lot of water for TVA, but for the health of your ratepayers and for the longevity of your well field, you need to at least get on board with this idea for this recycled wastewater plant. And at that time, we got verbal commitment from President McGowan, from the board members, and a lot more awareness in the decision makers of what that really meant. So we're like, okay, well, call it a win for now. Well, then, behind closed doors, our Memphis mayor, President McGowan's having these discussions with the XAI team and said, if you're going to need 1 million gallons a day, don't drill a well. They'll fight you. I'm like, yes, we will. MLGW can sell you the water, no problem. But what we really want to get going is this recycled water plant. And they said, oh, we're all about sustainability? Sure. Woo, that's a whole thing. But anyway, so within a day of the announcement, that June 5th announcement that just threw everybody off, MLGW came out with a press statement saying they are in support of this recycled wastewater facility. So we were like, okay, that's a promise. All right, so we're going to follow through on this. Little did we know that Elon Musk would rise to the rank of co-president and things would be so much different. Data center boom is happening. AI is this new technology that is going to become a big part of our lives. We didn't know any of this just even last June. But what we have today is this little 13 acres where that red box is. That land has been sold to XAI to build this recycled wastewater plant. They have officially turned in their application for a permit from our state, and they now have 2 formal letters from TVA and from another industry down the street, Nucor Steel, to be customers of that plant. This is the first time we've had any of this stuff in documentation, in writing, so we're like, okay, we got something to go off of, but that's a solution for XAI's first plant. We do not know what they're going to be doing for their second plant. So their second plant, they just bought a new warehouse. It was built probably to be just like a logistics warehouse kind of thing. They bought this 1 million square foot warehouse because they want to add more computer chips. They're in this whole race to build 1 million GPU, whatever. It means a lot of water. We're concerned about that. And so this Davis well field, there's XAI-1, that's supplying water right now to the first facility. It can supply water to the second facility. There's another little smaller well field right there. So they could use more aquifer water there. So that's something we just don't know. We don't know their water source. And we have taken a very strong stance, no aquifer use for cooling supercomputers. We are a very water-rich part of the world. There are so many other places that invest a lot of money in cleaning up water to use it. And we think that this is one of those examples that we need to be pushing for. How are we prioritizing preserving the 2,000-year-old water? And this is an example of how we can do that. So it's a solution we've been pushing for. It's been very challenging, very contentious. I'll say that. So I'm got a couple more slides and then we'll be having questions. So I got you on a super finite, very specific example. But when we think about groundwater protection, it's a system we're working with. It's a whole bunch of users. It's a whole bunch of players. It's a whole bunch of things going on. And Shelby County has something very unique. Back in the 1970s, our state legislature passed the Tennessee Water Quality Act. This is the same state law that they're trying to erode right now in relation to our wetlands. They're trying to peel back some of those laws and take away some of our wetlands protections. But this law gave a lot of power to water protections, including allowing well permitting. Now this is specifically where wells are drilled, how they're constructed, making sure contaminants or storm water can't get back down into the aquifer. But this is where the beginning of kind of groundwater protection starts in Tennessee. In the 80s, you have our first hits of contamination in Collierville and South Memphis wells. That was the first time we've ever recognized that breaches exist. Like, oh wait, this clay layer isn't thick and solid. This can get into our water. And so that started this whole conversation in our community. The county mayor was involved, the MLDW president at the time was involved, and throughout 1987 and 88, ordinances were passed to create a groundwater board and to expand the duties of the Shelby County Health Department to do a lot more to protect our water and think long term. And they get this delegated authority from TDEC, so our state gives them this power. And in 1990, a contract between the county and all of those municipalities, all those water users that we all mentioned earlier, all came together and said, we will pay into the health department and create a little fund and support you. Well, that fee hasn't been updated since 1990. We haven't updated any of our fees. We've got a department of 4 people with a budget smaller than our small nonprofits. So I can give you a little hint. They're not really doing their job yet, but we have something to work with. We have something to work with. And the Shelby County Health Department, we're the only county in Tennessee that has these special groundwater powers. Technically, any other county could adopt something similar. We're the only one that has taken that option. So we think that Shelby County could be the example for how we can intervene, how we can build these long-term management programs, and we want it to be community involved, community led. This is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Recycling wastewater for 2 major industrial users, awesome. It's not the end though. And you've got your groundwater board. It's made up of utility employees, some volunteers, and then you have the actual health department staff. They deal with siting, septic permits, and well permits. But they could be doing a lot more. And so Protect Our Aquifer is in the middle of building a guidance to groundwater protection. This is not meant to be like, okay, do this and we're good. This is meant to be a roadmap. What is the community most interested in doing? What decision makers do we need to make sure are a part of this conversation to build systems, build structures? And there's kind of 6 buckets that we're talking about. Well field management. I gave y'all a whole spiel on well fields, right? We need to think about sustainable yield. When is too much drawdown too much? Do we want to think about a cutoff where it's like, we don't want to mix 50% young water? How do we think about alternative uses around those? How do we think about managing around polluted sites in those areas to ensure that they have the best spill containment, the best mitigation? Data management. That's a whole super nerdy saga, but we don't have very good data management at all. We don't have much shared information. We don't have shared resources. That needs to be, we need to bring in the USGS, TDEC, and local players to ensure that we're all working from the same information. We have a mapping the system. You know, we're starting to learn about breaches. We still don't even know where they all are. How can we make smart, informed decisions when we don't know where the vulnerabilities are? And the same goes to the recharge zone. The recharge zone, this is I do a whole fun presentation on this, but out of the whole state of Tennessee, it's been geologically mapped since the 60s, except for West Tennessee. So we discovered that when we're trying to think about critical aquifer recharge areas and how can we have smart growth and think about Blue Oval. And so we're talking with our state legislators now about getting some big funding to actually finish the job and help us be knowledgeable about our system. So when that comes to fruition next year, I'm going to need y'all to say, give them the money. Okay. Monitoring well programs. This is something that you see in a lot of other areas that have groundwater systems. You know, we look to other places. How do you manage your aquifer? How do you protect your groundwater? They all have programs like this. And monitoring well network can be something where you have facilities that have required monitoring wells where you can take samples, you can take water levels, and that's where we can get a better sense of where contamination is and how do we stop it before it gets to our drinking water supply. Groundwater reduction plan, this is thinking about pollution reduction, thinking about pumping reduction, and how could we have like efficiency programs for industries? Is there a loan program that could be set up? Is there a grant program that could be set up to help these companies invest in their own systems? And last but not least, education and workforce. We want everybody to be water literate. We want everyone to know about our aquifer, to be understanding of the role that y'all can play. But then also we need to be training future leaders. We have a huge gap in our engineering workforce. We have a huge gap in our water operators workforce. We need to be thinking about not only like the next generation, but this generation. You know, we really need to be thinking about getting people into these industries. So with that, I will open it for questions, but we have this QR code up. It will take you to our website. You can sign up for our newsletter out in the back over there. We would love for y'all to become donors of Protect Our Aquifer. We have a new super awesome program called the Water Warriors Training. One of them right over here, graduate, Tierney Mello, yay, woo! She sat through 10 weeks of super nerdy stuff like this, paid her each week, and we have this now program. We're going to 10 advocates last year, 15 this year, 20 next year, and this is an CC Foundation funded program, and we have to get a match. So we need to raise $50,000 this year so we can unlock the other $50,000, and you can become part of our Aquifer Advocates Circle and donate to that, and you will help fund the next generation of water warriors. So with that, I will pause for questions. Thank you. Yes?
Who controls who puts a well into the aquifer, and how is the pricing of water done?
So who controls putting wells in the aquifer? If you are in Shelby County, you have to get your well permit through the Shelby County Health Department. If you are in any other part of Tennessee, you have to submit a notice of intent to drill to TDEC, and that's all you gotta do. There's not even a real permit involved. So very lax rules. And then how much do they pay? If you have a private well in Shelby County, you pay $100 a year and you can pull as much as you want. If you have a private well outside of Shelby County, you can pull as much as you want. $0. That's something we would like to change. Yes?
Do those private wells include the average person and industry?
Yes, do those wells include the average person and industry? And yes, they do. And when I go into the weeds about the groundwater board, you might live out, in Eads or, out, in unincorporated Shelby County, and you don't have a water system. You don't live in a community, so you have your own well. You're in charge of your own water supply. But then you also have major industries in town that are our largest water user in Shelby County pumps 10 million gallons of water a day and pays $100 a year. So you've got a wide swath of users. And so one of the things that we have successfully done with the Groundwater Board is updated the permit fees. So now the permit fees, we have one more step through County Commission these next couple months, but the permit fees will go up, but we try to make sure that residential rates stayed low and the industrial rates stayed high to kind of match that impact to the aquifer.
How much higher are you talking about? Because from $100 for a commercial operation, that's nothing, right? Either is $1,000 or $10,000 if you're relying on that kind of water.
Yes, great question. She said, how much of an increase are we talking about? And we're baby steps. So for the private well users, the Groundwater Board agreed to $700 a year. Now this is something that is worth a little tangent, is that, I mentioned the Tennessee Water Quality Act. Tennessee manages water quality, not water quantity. Now in our minds it's one and the same, right? We saw this, you pump too much, you draw down the crappy stuff. Well, that's not how our state law works, and that's not how our state legislatures think. So we have to be very careful about how we are building these programs. So $700 a year will fund staff time to go inspect these wells and to go take a water sample and the cost of that water sample analysis. Now what we have on the regs here in Shelby County is the option to create a conservation fee if we need to deal with wasteful use. So there is an opportunity as a community and as a groundwater board that we can create a new conservation fee for private wells based on usage. And so that's something that we have been researching a lot about. How do other places do that? And how might we want to enact something like that? And we always try to look down the line, what could interfere with those plans? So we need to make sure there's education at the state level as to why that need would come. But that's something that will be in this, guidance to a groundwater protection plan, that we're going to need the community support to say, these are funds, not, there's the opportunity just to get money out of them because they're using this resource, but we have to answer the question, what is the money going towards? And that's why building these programs is so important, so we can use that money to support this science and this management that we so desperately need. And that's where we need to be understanding of how we're managing and protecting our aquifer. But I'm with you. Yes, sir.
If they get approval, how long will it take to make the secondary treatment plant? And I don't know, isn't the Mississippi a recharge zone also? Or am I incorrect in thinking that? Because if we're dumping water back into the Mississippi, it's sandy. I thought it was like 1,000 feet of sand. That's recharging our aquifer too, but I don't know.
A little bit, yes. So he asked, the first question was, how long will XAI take to build this plant, actually use the recycled water? TDEC has 365 days to issue the permit. So there will be a public comment period sometime this year. The land sale just happened like this past 2 weeks. So I haven't been out to the site recently to see if they've started building yet. But in that land sale agreement, we were very concerned about selling XAI land and then having them just do whatever they want with it. So the intention from the city is to sell them land to build a water recycling facility. And so we tried to make sure that in that language it stated that specifically, and the city had an option to get that land back if they have any bad actions. So we have a reversion clause, what the Memphis Business Journal called an aggressive reversion clause, which pretty much just says if they don't make enough construction headway within 1 year, we can buy that land back for $1. We sold it to them for almost $1 million, and we get all the whatever they've done to it, so we get that back. Or if they ever were to leave town and abandon the facility, automatically reverts back to the city's ownership, including the facility. So that made us feel like, okay, at least we've got some legal language there that we can work from. So we're thinking maybe in the next year or so. The second question was, remind me?
Mississippi recharge zone.
Yes. So the recharge zone, so does the Mississippi River recharge our aquifer? And it does to a small extent, but it more recharges our shallow aquifer. So if you were to look at our little cross section again, you know, the Mississippi River, almost there. Oh, it's kind of see. You kind of see like the Mississippi River sits on that shallow aquifer, and then you have the clay layer. So at the high times of the river, you can imagine that the river is pushing into the shallow aquifer up to 6 miles inland. Pretty cool, right? But then in low times, the shallow aquifer is feeding into the river. Now, this clay layer, you know, this is just an illustration for example, but the clay layer has been kind of scraped up over the years. So we think there are probably more breaches under and along the Mississippi River that probably is contributing a lot more recharge. But that's just not a very well studied thing. So, great question. Yes, ma'am.
What is Protect Our Aquifers' opinion about the stewardship that MLGW practices?
Ooh, juicy. She says, what is Protect Our Aquifers' opinion about MLGW stewardship of the aquifer? And I'll say they're headed in a different direction. They have, you know, they are a utility and their business is to sell water. So historically, MLGW has mined the aquifer. And it's really hard to say it any other way when you look at images like that. There has not been much thought about quality preservation, long-term thought. It's like, are my customers getting the water? Cool. Is it the cheapest in the country so we can attract more businesses? Cool. And that's been their stance for a long time. I think that there's been discussions more about, you know, since the 1% of our water bills going towards an aquifer study, there's been more discussion about what role does MLGW play. And MLGW is the largest user of our aquifer. That's really us and their customers, but as an entity, it's the largest user. So we believe they do play a role in that stewardship and in being a leader in what stewardship looks like. So MLGW has a seat on the groundwater board. That individual just got voted co-chair. So we plan on staying very engaged with her and making sure that they do play this larger role when we think about the long term. But unfortunately right now, you know, it's still kind of business as usual.
What was the person's name?
Her name is Kimberly Griswold. She's a water quality specialist at MLGW, and she is the president's representative on the groundwater board. Yes, ma'am.
So with the changing climate, we live down on the river and they've been dredging historically for the last 2 to 3 summers.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're saying is, as they change the bottom of the Mississippi, they're having more and more impact on the aquifer. Is that being done by the Corps of Engineers? Is there any oversight? What is the relationship
Yeah.
there?
Good question. So she asked about dredging that's been happening where they dig the sediments up out of the channel to make sure you can still get the boats and the barges through. And so, what do I want to show y'all? This one again. So the Mississippi River, just as a river itself, could be, you know, scraping up the bottom of that clay layer and could be eroding some of that. But when it comes to dredging, depending on the depth at which they go, they could be digging up some of the sediments and some of that clay. One thing that's so short answer, no one's in charge of the Army Corps' dredging that would potentially impact our geologic formations. They're not thinking about that. But one thing that's interesting on that note is, so here's Nonconna Creek. My little zapper went out, but here's Nonconna Creek. There's a lot of clay at the base of that creek. And in the 1950s, there was a big mining operation, like I think it's right over here. Let me think. Yes, right over here. And they dug up a lot of the shallow aquifer sediments. They dug up a lot of the clay. And what they ended up doing was they dug that and they ended up exposing the sands, the Memphis sands. And so that's the only known like unintentional human-made breach that we know of. And so Nancana Creek has some pretty low quality water. That water has been going into the aquifer and has been showing up in has been showing up in the Sheehan well field. So some of that, mining practices has kind of eroded our geology enough to actually like expose sands where you didn't know better back then. I'll give them that credit. Yes?
Can you explain the recharge zones a little bit more, how that works?
Yes. So I have some backup slides. Boom. Had a feeling it might come up. So the recharge zone is super duper duper important, okay? So this is the full extent of the Mississippi embayment, that layer cake, right? So the blue is the Memphis Aquifer, the green is the full thing. This orange swath, that's that recharge zone. So when we showed the little rain cloud, filtering in, that's that strip of land that resupplies water to this whole formation. Super important swath of land, and you notice it's pretty much all in West Tennessee. And so Ford's Blue Oval City is being built right on the edge. And they're going to be a new user of between 4 and 7 million gallons of water a day.
So that's a porous land.
Correct. So it's very sandy. It can, water can infiltrate in, and that's where it's replenished, but also means that there could be contaminants that are have less protection geologically. And one of the things that I mentioned kind of earlier is that we really don't have this thing well mapped. So there's been a few efforts lately, but you see the band, see how it's kind of all these fingers and kind of squirrely at the bottom? That's been pretty well mapped, right at the edge of Shelby County over decades from the U.S. Geological Survey, University of Memphis. But then you can kind of see the rest is kind of straight and kind of plain. That's a model-generated swath of land. We have not ground truthed that to really know where the clay is, where the clay isn't. We don't know enough about it. There's been some new studies done where the USGS flew this really cool torpedo-looking thing that sends a signal down into the ground, and if it hits clay, it bounces up, and if it doesn't hit clay, it keeps going. So they've been trying to, use some cutting-edge stuff to start mapping out our recharge zone better. And this is what I was talking about, getting funding to really understand that better. And one of the reasons that we're, concerned about that is, that's where our good 2,000-year-old water comes from. But West Tennessee is going to experience the largest boom in growth it's ever seen with Blue Oval coming. And it is still coming. So I think they're going to be building gas cars as well as EVs, but I'm on the Facebook threads trying to get all the drama all the time. But we don't want to pave over the recharge zone, new strip malls, new houses, driveways, because that's going to impede that water from getting down. So how do we grow smart? How do we still build these communities? How do we still do this? But we've got this really exciting opportunity to learn from what went wrong elsewhere and do it right here. But knowing where recharge is really happening, one thing I don't have on here, but you got this big swath. But really, there's areas where the sands are right at the surface, water's getting in. And then there's areas where, there's a lot more dirt. It takes like 1,000 years for the water to get down. So we're trying to understand that mapping of where those really sandy spots are, because those are the areas that we would want to maybe have incentives for green infrastructure, or incentivize more land conservation in the Wolf River watershed or in the Hatchie River watershed, and thinking about how can we have smart growth, smart development in that region based on science and based on what we know. So, thanks for that. I'm assuming y'all are gonna want me off the stage eventually, but I'm going. Yes, sir.
I wonder if Blue Oval needs to use gray water. I don't know what kind of water usage they expect.
So he says, I think Blue Oval should use gray water as well. And yeah, so from what we understand, the mega site authority is a state authority that has leased the land and runs the water plant and the wastewater plant. And they've got 7 deep wells drilled into the aquifer in the recharge zone, up to 7 million gallons of pumping a day. And there's a plan to build a water recycling plant at that wastewater plant for them to reuse some. I don't think that's started, I don't think that's happened yet, but that's something we definitely want to follow through on and make sure that they can reduce some of that aquifer pumping and recycle some of that water. So he's thinking, I love it. Yes, sir.
I would just guess that in that recharge zone, there's a lot of agriculture, and people are fertilizing, and maybe they're using pesticide, and that would be something hard to control.
Right. So he's talking about in this recharge zone, you've got a lot of agriculture using all kinds of different chemicals for growing their crops, and that is true. We don't have a lot of good water quality testing. The good thing in West Tennessee is it rains, so our farmers don't use that much water. If they were out in West Texas or luckily it rains, so they do have pivot really from like the droughts we've been seeing, these flash droughts where it just doesn't rain for 3 months in the middle of the summer. So we understand the need to have these wells have this backup. But the chemical inputs are really unknown how far that can get deep down into the soil and entering the water system. And that's where those residential wells, people are kind of in charge of their own water and their own water quality. And that can be, we would like to see a day where there are health department services, there are abilities to get their water tested and having some resources to ensure the drinking water's clean. Did you have a follow-up? No. Yes, Wanda.
Is there a way for us to monitor whether or not an entity is drilling an unauthorized well?
Ooh. No. Is there a way to know if an entity is drilling an unauthorized well? Sounds like we got a watchdog over here. I love it. Unfortunately, no. But we do have a whistleblower portal on our website. So we have a way on the website where you can either send in through the Signal app, which our State Department has made pretty popular, and also you could also like mail something, with no return address. So if people do want to send us confidential information, we try to make some ways to do that, and people use that portal, I'll say. So we definitely probably could do a better job of announcing that's out there. But usually when it comes to these wells being drilled and it ends up hurting either their health or their neighbor, and that's where they start to get complaints. And so the state is supposed to play a bigger role in that, and they haven't historically. So there's some pressure from the state legislature to provide more resources on making sure these wells are getting properly built and that there's actually somebody making sure that they are constructed and they're safe. But it's hard to track. Yes, ma'am.
In the recharge zone, the water is today's water, and it percolates through the sand, and then does it take 2,000 years? Does it become 2,000-year-old water at that point?
Yep. So let me see, best way to go back to the cross section, I guess. So like, see where there's no clay there. So when that rain gets in, if you are in the recharge zone, if you live in Somerville, or if you live somewhere, in Fayette County, and you're on your own well, your well could be 60 feet deep, could be 200 feet deep. So the age of your water is definitely going to be younger, right? You're going to have that younger water, and that's why that area can be much more vulnerable to pollution because there is no clay layer and you have that less time for water to get down. Now, when we talk about the good 2,000-year-old stuff, some of those deeper wells are definitely going to have that older water. But if in sustainability, if we make sure rainwater can get into the ground and there's enough water getting in that's beyond the needed supply for that community, it's going to keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's going to be, the flow of water is to the west. So that means that what eventually will come underneath Memphis. So that's where you get that 2,000-year-old number for us. Yes?
Sara, when you talk about contaminants, like how much is considered a contaminant and how is that calculated?
Ooh, I love these questions. I'm just going, if that's okay, Eric. I don't know, okay. He was like, you have 30 minutes. I'm like, okay. Okay, so how are contaminants calculated and how do we know that? So, so we have this thing called the MCL, Maximum Contaminant Level. That is a federally regulated thing where these are going to be chemicals that have been studied and proven to harm human health in some form or fashion, and they will hit a threshold. Okay, at this level, consuming it should be okay. Once you get above that, that's unhealthy. So there's some regulatory standards that our utilities have to make. So some examples are like TCE, trichloroethylene, which is an industrial degreaser. It's all over this county. We've got a lot of nasty TCE sinking into our aquifer. That's what dry cleaners use. And back in the day, you just dumped your buckets of stuff, you buried your stuff, and it was like, oops, we drink from underground and we've been burying crap underground for a long time. Whoops. So that kind of chemical, you know, like the MCL is like 5 parts per million. But one example when I talked about that Collierville well field being shut down, one of the main chemicals that was the reason it shut down is called hexavalent chromium. And that is the same like Aaron Brockovich chemical that you talk about. So hexavalent chromium, federal standards, was 10 parts per billion. So out of a billion drops of water, 10 of them are unsafe. Wait, yeah, billion drops of water. If 10 of them have that, unsafe, right? Well, Collierville wells were having 5 parts per billion. And the James Llewellyn, the town administrator at the time, he was just sketched out in general that there was contamination in the aquifer. He was just like, that just sounds bad. So he ends up finding a study out of California that said actually 5 is the level we have in our state because it's shown to cause cancers and cause a lot of reproductive health issues. And so EPA was saying, hey, no, you're good. You have all the way to 10. He's like, I don't want to be the one that allowed my community to get poisoned because you said more poison's okay. So, you know, he made that decision to shut down, you know, a multi-million-dollar decision to shut that down. And so there's a lot of conflicting science, but it's that challenge of government catching up to industry. We're always producing new chemicals. You know, you've heard of PFAS, the forever chemicals. We've had those on the market since the 50s. I mean, we probably have it all in our bodies right now, unfortunately. And they're just now coming around to regulating it. And we know that the safe level for that is like 0.0 super tiny. And so that's the challenge of, you know, being science-based and also having our regulations and our politicians catch up and having the guts enough to stand up to chemical industry is my personal opinion. I guess POA's opinion too, whatever. What else? Yes?
It's a bigger picture question. I know you mentioned a couple times that comparing what you're doing here in Memphis with other areas and what you could get, another similar scenario and what they do and it solves this problem. So a long time ago, I was looking into this. I read that there was a wonderful aquifer just like ours under Kansas, and they totally messed it up and destroyed it. Not so nice anymore. So is that one of the ones that you would kind of learn from their mistakes?
Mm-hmm.
So what would be a couple others that in the country that you would say, okay, this is what we look to, like thinking of doing it right, or
Mm-hmm.
they're a little ahead of us.
Yeah.
Competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. So what other kind of aquifers in the country have we looked at to kind of see what they're doing right or wrong? And you mentioned in Kansas, the Ogallala Aquifer is this huge formation from Nebraska all the way down to North Texas that has gone completely dry in some places or has gone down to like a really salty, briny state. And they've known about that issue since the 70s. And everyone's like, you gotta, somebody's gotta. And it's been one of those like Spider-Man meme, anybody? But you know, it's been like no one's really taken the lead and like really working together to think about how, yes, it's gonna impact you, but do you want your generation to be able to farm on your land? You know, that's the real question. So there's a couple of different areas, but Washington State, they have kind of a sandy, silty aquifer similar to ours. That's where they have this critical aquifer recharge effort. They've mapped all their everything back in the, they finished that job in the 90s. And they have these kind of zoning laws about where you can and can't build certain types of things. They're having super extra spill containments on these critical aquifer areas. So that's an area we've looked to. Central Texas is the Edwards Aquifer that spans into San Antonio. It's kind of this cool U shape. That's a karst aquifer, so it's more like East Tennessee. But as far as the level of stakeholdership, the level of management that they've done, that's a big shining example. And it's in Texas. You know, you try to look to similar states so we can see what's possible. We don't really talk to our state legislators about what they're doing in California per se. That one has really good management plans, but there's some things that we wouldn't want to take from them. Like, for example, they have a sales tax that the voters vote on every 5 years to create a conservation fund to buy up land in the recharge zone. Love the concept. We put such a burden on our sales tax to make up for the tax base that we give away. And we wouldn't want to advocate for an inequitable fund that's going to continue to put a lot of burden on our poor community. So we have to kind of see what's out there, but then you've got an earmarked pot of money. That would be good to have. So how do we kind of think about what concepts and how do we adapt it here? Yeah, there's a bunch of others, but good question. So we're looking all over the place. All right. One more. Haven't heard from you yet. Oh, wait, no. 2 more? I told him. Okay. Yes.
Has the New Madrid Fault been plotted on any of these?
Ooh, yeah, the New Madrid Fault. Yeah, so the New Madrid Fault, so it has been plotted a little bit, and one of the things with the fault lines, there's actually some that have shown up in the clay where the clay kind of does a little, and that actually creates this kind of breach concept where it's not the same kind of geologic digging that happened back in the day, but it does kind of have this avenue, and that stuff has not been well mapped yet, but it definitely plays into the geology factor, so good question. Okay, last one.
Are we supposed to be afraid of the next thing?
Ooh, I don't, that's.
People coming in and because nobody seems to quite know exactly what's going on in our say. So,
I wouldn't say, what are we supposed to do about it? That's a really good and big question. I think a healthy level of skepticism is good on everything. We very much work off of cautious optimism in a lot of ways. But I think that this XAI is part of a bigger trend for data centers. And we don't have much understanding as a community and as a country of how we're really going to deal with the energy and the water demands, and what is that computing being used for? I think there's another layer that is not aquifer related in any way. And so I think that we need to decide, how do we have more local say over data center approval? So there are other places in the country that have, either special use permits where they have to, go before their land use control board, their city council. And I think Memphis is looking for answers to have something to that effect, to give a little bit more local understanding of these impacts and how could we require alternative energy, alternative water. But I think we need to think beyond just the second facility they bought, because I think a lot more is coming. And our chamber has been really kind of setting up our community to attract more. And I think that we as a community need to get smarter and louder about how that looks. So I'll leave it at that. Yay! Well, thank y'all so much.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So I particularly appreciated the questions about the recharge zone. The Wolf River Conservancy last year surpassed 20,000 acres protected in the recharge zone. And so that's been a focus of ours, as Sara mentioned, for a long time. And as part of his master's program, probably 10 years ago, our Chief Conservation Officer, Ryan Hall, did map out the top 10,000 most ecologically valuable parcels in the Wolf River watershed, which includes Shelby, Fayette, Benton County, Mississippi, and Marshall County, Mississippi. And so our conservation work is highly concentrated in tracking down those ecologically valuable parcels in the watershed, in the recharge zone, and acquiring them or placing conservation easements on them so that they are preserved in perpetuity. And as the only accredited land trust headquartered here in West Tennessee, we take that responsibility and part of our mission very seriously. And so the work that Protect Our Aquifer does in identifying all of these issues and advocating for these issues dovetails really perfectly with the conservation work that the Wolf River Conservancy is doing. And so we're really, really, really pleased to see their formation in 2016 and then have them as an extremely vocal partner and advocate for the work, because it's not Wolf River Conservancies alone, it's not their work alone, it's the effort of a community coming together. And so we couldn't be prouder to platform the voice of Protect Our Aquifer and have a room like this filled with people interested. So thank you for coming out.
Y'all are all water warriors, okay?
Indeed.
Yay!
Absolutely. And we get a lot of questions as well about XAI, and the question of should we be afraid, I empathize with that question a lot. And I think healthy skepticism is great. It is good. It's a smart way to approach things like this. And from our perspective at the Conservancy, what a great opportunity we have to push the narrative. The Chamber is doing their job, right? They're doing it really well. They're attracting business to our community. That's what they exist for. And now we, the people in this room, Protect Our Aquifer, Wolf River Conservancy, have to step up and also do our jobs. And what a great opportunity we have to partner with a business, an internationally known titan of that industry in XAI, for better or worse, to push them to do the right thing in our community and think about the positive benefits that can have for Memphis and folks here in the Mid-South. And so until it's not, we're going to presume and hope that it is going to be a really positive thing for our community. And we'll keep pushing, and I know Protect Our Aquifer and Sara will keep pushing for them to be doing the right things. So thank you for coming out. We really do appreciate it. Please check out protectouraquifer.com.
.org.
.org. Yep.
We got a little table in the back.
Check out their table in the back. Sign up to be a water warrior. We've also got a table. We're selling some merch. We've got great information about our upcoming events. And if you are so inclined, please visit wolfriver.org to check out everything that the Wolf River Conservancy has got going on. So, thank you. Have a great Saturday.
Woohoo! Thank you. Fun.